Good afternoon. My name is Anna D'Souza. I want to welcome all of you here to our DEI Friday. Today is November 18th, and we are so happy to welcome my colleague and friend, Don Waisanen, a professor at the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs. He's going to talk with us and share with us some of his research and practical work into liberating structures. He will describe those in a few moments. First, I want to welcome each and every one of you who are here in this Zoom room today. Happy to have you here on Friday, cold, brisk Friday in November. I think last DEI Friday was 75 degrees and now it's 35 degrees. So we'll be talking about climate justice maybe in the spring and how climate change is going to affect different communities. But for now, just stay warm. So as I mentioned, we are excited today to welcome Don Waisanen. We will first give him our full attention, and one of the ways that we practice doing that is by grounding ourselves, to getting ourselves into the present and off of whatever we were doing at 11:59. I know Don and I were here at 11:59, but I can tell you at 11:52 I was doing something that was not related, and I got to get it out of my mind. So let us take a moment now. I invite you all to get comfortable where you are. If you feel like it, please join me and close your eyes. Often for me, when I close my eyes, it helps me to get more into the moment. Today, as the grounding, I will invite you to focus on taking deep, slow inhales. And as you exhale, please try to let out whatever is coming up. Maybe exhale loudly, especially if you're in a space where you can do that. Maybe exhale like some singers do with some lip trills. Helps kind of with the relaxation of some of the muscles in your face. As you focus on deep inhales and these kind of exaggerated exhales, I'm going to just for about 10-15 seconds invite you to put into your mind this idea of liberation. Don is going to talk about liberating structures, and he'll define those structures. And at the core, they are ways to engage people, to build and create the cultures and the institutions and the lives we want, the relationships we want. And I want you to think about, as you take these next 15-20 seconds of deep breaths and long sighs, I want you to think about what liberation would mean for you. What it would mean in your job, what it would mean in your relationships, what it would mean in your body, what it would mean in your mind. And I know for some of you, you think about this a lot. I know I do. Think a lot about what liberation means and what that looks like in practice. And for those of you who have not thought about this a lot, I welcome you. I welcome you to this journey of thinking about liberation, and today discussing with Don what liberating structures are. After you allow your breathing to go back to its normal, regular pattern, I'll invite you to open your eyes back up, and welcome again. We are so happy to have you with us, Don, today. I am going to give a very brief introduction to my colleague. Don Waisanen is a professor at the Marxe School. He teaches and researches public and leadership communication. He is the author of 7 books, including Leadership Standpoints, Improv for Democracy, and a forthcoming work on the ways to address voter suppression throughout the US, which is called States of Confusion. NYU Press. And give it up for not just Don, but our colleague who's in this room too, Sonia Jarvis, and our other colleague, Nicole Gordon. So, Don, we're so happy to have you here today. We really appreciate you and your time. And even though you're part of this community, I want to say that we still appreciate your time taking extra time out to lead us in these discussions and this learning. And we are both Don and I are so excited because we really, I mean, I am excited about what he's going to share with you today. And I really think some of these things we can implement at our school, at our college. And so, on that note, Don, I welcome you, and let's all give him some love in the chat, and in whatever we can give him, whatever love. All right, Don, take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Anna. And I see Anna is doing singing lessons, she told me this year, and I see the influence of that in these opening liberating moments. Thanks so much. So in the spirit of liberating structures, it's really critical to have people connect with each other first too. So in addition to the first grounding exercise, what I would like you all to do is in breakout rooms, it's gonna be really quick, 4 minutes. You're gonna be with 2 other folks. I would like you to share out, and I'm going to put these in the chat box right now. There's 2 questions. One is, what brings you joy? Want to know that. Just share out in threes what brings you joy, about a minute each. And then the second thing is, what is one thing life is teaching you right now? So let's go into that before I do a deep dive into these tools of liberating structures. Let's orient ourselves to each other for just a moment. So you should see your breakout rooms opening right about now. Discuss those 2 questions, go around in your threes for about 4 minutes. We'll come right back. Okay, welcome back. I hope you had a good chance to connect with a few other folks there, learn some things. I want to start us off today with a book that I think is going to go in one of my top 10 read books of all time. It's by Priya Parker. It's called The Art of Gathering. I think some of you may have heard of this, and I just want to read the opening passage of this book because it connects so much to what we're going to talk about today. Priya says, "The way we gather matters. Gatherings consume our days and help determine the kind of world we live in both our intimate and public realms. In democracies, the freedom to assemble is one of the foundational rights granted to every individual. In countries descending into authoritarianism, one of the first things to go is the right to assemble. Why? Because of what can happen when people come together, exchange information, inspire one another, test out new ways of being with one another. And yet, and here's the crux, most of us spend very little time thinking about the actual ways in which we gather." So I have been a communication professor at the Marxe School for 12 years now. Let me give you a little bit of motivating background and context for all of you. My research and teaching has a big assumption behind it. And the assumption is that while our understandings of technology and science are in this exponential direction, right? If you looked at a graph, how are human beings doing with advances in technology, science, medicine, things like that? We've been in this exponential direction for a really long time. Not that that's all equal for everyone, not that access is equal to those things, but in general, just the knowledge human beings have about these realms is in this really on this amazing trajectory. To give you an example, I have a son who has type 1 diabetes, and I can tell you just firsthand experience, the ways in which type 1 diabetes treatments have advanced in the last 5 years alone. It's like we're in a different era compared to 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago with the technology with that. So that said, I'm going to put out there that our understandings of the form and quality of communication, the form and quality of communication, the forms of communication people use, the quality of it in and across societies is not at that exponential level. And I think in many ways we've gone down, we go up, we go down. It's much more of a plateau, or it's getting slightly better. I would argue that the forms of communication we tend to use, and I know I have a universal we going on there, but just in general, that human beings use are not adequate to meet the demands of the age we are in, where we have more people from more cultures and subcultures and backgrounds in the world coming into contact as strangers often than ever before. So I am kind of part of the work that I do is to figure out what are the forms of communication that will launch us into the future. And that intersects quite deeply with work in DEI. My background is in debate, dialogue, deliberation, and I also throw comedy in there. That's been a big influence in my background too. Debate, deliberation, dialogue, comedy all share one thing in common. They are all about proliferating perspectives, seeing things from at least two or more angles at a time, right? Never getting wedded in a kind of fundamentalist sense to a particular narrative or a particular way of being, right? Multiplicity is very important to each of those realms and toggling between two perspectives. Why is that so important to me? I'll share with all of you. I grew up in from a very fundamentalist religious background where strains of very kind of totalitarian strains of thought were present a lot of times. And eventually in my life, the stories that were told ran up against the stories that I saw people living, and the two didn't match. And so this interest in debate and proliferating perspectives really started for me quite early on. And I think that led me to where I am. So I am a white, cis, neurotypical, heterosexual male with a motivation to never stop learning about my own and others' positionalities. And so these threads kind of all come together in various ways for me from those positions. I'm also very interested in forms of leadership in which leaders decenter themselves and distribute knowledge and distribute leadership. I think those are the forms of leadership we most need in this day and age. And my big question for folks is, what if we don't do that? What if we have leadership that's not distributing that work to people? I think we can see the effects of that in the kind of policies we get all around us that are inequitable and leading people in particular directions that are not inclusive to all of our communities. So what I want to draw attention to today, though, is I know we talk a lot about structures, but I want to talk about microstructures today, right? And I know that those in this group are very familiar with microaggressions, microinvalidations, things like that, the ways in which behaviors at the level of everyday life or certain actions play out between people on the ground level. And the level I want to bring us to today is microstructures with meetings, right? The ways in which we gather, the ways in which at Baruch College we hold meetings. I'm going to ask questions about why are we following Robert's Rules of Order in our staff and faculty meetings, right? What is that? Where did that come from? This 150-year-old structure that is not very inclusive, and by virtue of how it's done, it always excludes, by the way, right? So hopefully we can sort of raise the alarm a little bit on things like that. I think the ways in which we meet and we gather are often vestiges of a white supremacist legacy that is still present with us. It's the way in which these things play out. So having done liberating structures for many years, one value to all of you in advance that I hear from many people is they like that this is a way, and this is a participant in a seminar like this once said, wow, this is a way to really operationalize DEI. It's not all of DEI, it's not all the things we could be doing, but it's definitely one of them at the level of like, how do we gather? How do we hold meetings? This actually gives us tools to work with that. So here's what I'd like to do right now. I'm gonna bring up a little questionnaire. And if you have a pen and paper or just want to do this on your phone or type it in, I'm going to ask you just to put a number down for each of these questions that I'm going to go through. Okay. So, and then you're going to add these up at the end, and I'll tell you what to do with there. It's kind of a way we can all do this collectively at the same time. Okay. So here we go. Let me zoom in on, okay. Let me zoom in on this for a moment. Okay, so I want you to just get into the space in your mind of, okay, I go to a lot of meetings. I'm managing projects. I'm invited to a lot of meetings, right? So what I want you to think about is on this scale here of 1 never to 10 always, okay, what you would put for these, okay? In general, at the end of your meetings or projects, the type of meetings you would typically go to, how often do you assess specifically the level of engagement among participants, right? How often and that could just be, how often is that kind of thing done in the type of meetings you go to? Where would you put that on average from 1 to 10? 10 always, 1 never. Just go ahead and write that down on a sheet of paper for yourself. Let's go to the second one. At the start of your meetings, how often do you take time for all attendees to generate together a common purpose for their participation? Okay. By the way, Priya Parker, the first 2 chapters of her book are all about purpose, right? Have a purpose. It does a lot of DEI work just in having that. 3, on average, in your meetings or work sessions, what percentage of the time is spent listening to presentations? Give yourself you could do 1 for 10% or less, 7 points for that. I would just do between, it's a little complicated, between 1 and 10 here. What would you just put for that value? 10 being all the time. 4, how many different methods of interaction do you use in your meetings to engage every attendee and improve the effectiveness of the working group? Okay. Again, just think 1 to 10, 10 being always. We use a lot of different methods. Put that there. Okay. 5, in the agendas of your meetings or work sessions, how often do you specify the method of interaction that will be used for each topic and its purpose, right? During this part of the meeting, we're going to break beyond Robert's Rules of Order, and we're going to do something different, for instance, right? 6, in your meetings or work sessions, how often is someone acting as the facilitator? Between 1 and 10. Next one, in your meetings or work sessions, how often do you change the configuration of the group? For instance, from working together as a whole group to working in small groups or pairs or working individually. How often does that happen? How are things changed up? Is there a part where it's like, everybody for a minute, let's be silent, let's figure things out by ourselves first, let's have pairs, let's have groups, we're gonna mix it up. 8, in your meetings or work sessions, how often does the role of facilitator shift among members of the group? Is it always one person facilitating in particular in meetings, or 2 people, or the same 3 people, the usual suspects, or are there rotations? Next one, between 1 and 10, how often do you make an intentional decision to include new people with different perspectives or functional roles in your meetings or work sessions? Okay, 5 more, here we go. Number 10, how often do you make the decision to include in your meeting or work sessions all or most of the people that will be affected by the decisions that will be made? 1 never, 10 always. Okay, next one, with your working group, how frequently do you engage as a group without presentations and with the freedom to co-create the agenda together? Okay, and next one, how frequently do you create opportunities for everyone to share their own ideas for moving forward together without regard to formal position or rank? That might be anonymously, by the way, right? That might be, we want to remove the power dynamics completely and not really know the sources of ideas, things like that. 3 more. How often do you deviate from your agenda to engage group members in unscripted sessions formed to respond adaptively to themes that emerged in the moment? Last 2. How frequently do you create opportunities to innovate, create something new with diverse people from other functions or with clients you serve? And lastly, how frequently do you work together in a space that makes it possible and easy to creatively mix and reconfigure participant groups? What that means is, are the desks bolted to the ground in the space that you meet in, where everybody is just facing forward, for instance? Is there a possibility of doing a circle? Could you do chairs in a different way? Could you go to a different room, mix things up? Or is it always kind of the same thing? We always meet in the boardroom around a really big table that is immovable. Okay, so go ahead and add up those numbers and take a moment once you add those up to divide that by 15. So the top score here would be 150. Divide that by 15. And what I would like you to do once you have done that is to put that score from 1 to 15 into the chat box for everyone to see.
Don? while people are doing their calculations, let's give them a moment. Can you please just describe Robert's rules for those who are unfamiliar of some of that fun
Yes.
stuff that we deal with as faculty? Thank you.
Yes, Robert's Rules of Order, without going too far into the weeds, is a process tool, a procedural tool for running meetings, right? Where we say, here's a set agenda, and usually you have to get one or two people to agree to items on that agenda. Does everybody, can I get one or two motions to approve the last agenda, right? It's usually one or two. It's not everybody, right? And it can be the usual suspects. And you run through the agenda. It's a majoritarian tool, so 51% is usually the accepted number for approving things or more, right? I don't want to go too much further than that. It's just a typical tool that's used in organizations. It's very formal and inflexible.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly. I just wanted to highlight that I think it's, we were talking about structures, and structures can vary a lot. And Don will talk about this a little bit. But one, and I think Ryan Coughlin put in the chat that it may have come out of the military. I wouldn't be surprised. It's very extremely organized. If you want to switch anything, you've got to have a motion to switch it. Then you were allowed to switch, and then it's very. And there's I would also include, and I'm not sure if this is Robert's rules or just some of our faculty bylaws, but there are often things like the person who's been on the faculty the longest is to chair some meeting. Okay, like that may not be under Robert's rules, but there are many small things that I think fall into the structures as a faculty member that I can speak of, that are coming out of, as you mentioned, Don, earlier, like a very white supremacist kind of historical legacy, and so that is the shortest version of Robert's rules. I know that not all meetings are run like that, but many faculty meetings have to be run like that, and that's kind of part of the bylaws and stuff. So thank you for explaining that, Don.
And Sonia has put a definition of who Robert is in the chat box for everyone. Thank you, Sonia. And it's the most common parliamentary procedure authority used. It's a whole thing. There's many like it as well that we could use as a foil for what we're going to talk about today. Okay, I'm just going through the chat box. I'm seeing, it looks like, just by eyeballing it, an average of 5 out of 15, right? And some as low as 4, some as high as maybe 7 or 8 out of 15. So I hope, first of all, just to start off with, this gap between where we are, how we're feeling about our meetings, and this question of what would it take to run our meetings, our gatherings in more diverse, inclusive, and equitable ways, is provoked for you, and that we can do something about it. So let's turn to liberating structures. Let me just give you a quick overview of what this is, where it came from, what they are, and then I'm going to have you talk about this in groups for just a moment. So liberating structures says, and I like this setup, it's very easy. There are 5 ways everyone, everywhere on this planet, very broadly speaking, organizes themselves when it comes to gatherings. There's 5 ways just about everyone everywhere from what we can tell, and this is cross country based on comparative research as well. It's not just within the US. There's some really typical go-to ways human beings tend to gather themselves in meetings and things like that. Down here in the lower left-hand corner are the most controlled methods, where there's typically one person and it's a very centralized control. And by the way, in and of themselves, there's nothing, I would argue there's nothing wrong with these. It's when these become so deeply embedded as default settings in our organizations, they become chronic go-tos. That's where the issues manifest themselves for DEI work. So down here, presentations, one person, highly controlled, not a lot of room for voice. You're not really tapping into the information, actually and the feelings and the loyalties and all this emotional and intellectual and affective, cognitive, behavioral information that's actually taking place in a room. It's very controlled presentation. And this is just a staple thing, right? So one person speaks, but this can be good, right? This can be good sometimes. We need to learn things and can be good. But if this is the only thing we go to over and over again, we are certainly not including others and we are not engaging others. Close to the presentation is the status report, which is a little bit of bait and switch, right? It's like, well, we're not just having one person speak. We have four. They're each going to talk for 15 minutes each, and then there will be 5 minutes for Q&A, right? Still very controlled in terms of the information flows and the level at which the two big variables here are inclusion and engagement. The level at which everyone is included and engaged, still very low in the status report. Managed discussions, won't get too far into this, can also be like that. It could be, these are very controlled discussions. I would argue Robert's rules and forms like that are, they're often very much done in this vein, where in the course of a 2-hour meeting, you really won't have many people talk or share voice. Power relations are pretty inequitable by virtue of just the structure of these. So these are kind of the top three. Over here, surprisingly, are two structures that are go-tos in which there's very little structure, right? So where the other ones on the bottom here are highly controlled meeting forms, organizing forms, up here, these are just anything goes, right? So open discussion is like, if I came out here and I said, well, what do you all think, right? What do you think of this? What's going to happen when I do that, right? We've got something like 30 people here, and I just go, what do you think? Neil Hernandez, can I just see you on my screen and you're a dear friend. Can I have you surmise what, from your own point of view, what might happen for just open discussion?
Of course, dear friend. On an open discussion, what I like about it is everyone can speak. And one thing to be mindful of, at least from my perspective, is will the shy people speak even in an open discussion? Will they feel comfortable enough to speak, or will the dominant voices use that open discussion to dominate, even though it's at least on its face, a more liberating structure, if you will.
Neil, that's exactly it. Years of research have shown when you have just completely freewheeling open discussions, that actually reinforces a structure of the status quo, which is there's usual voices, there's dominant voices or comfortable speaking. For those of us running classes, you have a class of 30 people, of 50 people, there will be some who are willing to speak, and others, maybe of more introverted nature, that's terrifying. The idea of just speaking out of the blue to a big group of people. Neil, I know you're not one of them, by the way, so that's why I asked you to join in here. Thank you so much. But just open discussions can just end up replicating the status quo, and inclusion and engagement can actually be very low in those as well. Brainstorm is another category of this. I think this is a bit more of a debatable category, but this is also, hey, what does everyone think? Here's maybe a few rules, and without some kind of guiding structure to make sure everyone's included and engaged in the discussion, these can quickly turn into the same format as open discussion. Not always, but these are kind of the big five. These five are the foils for liberating structures. Liberating structures was kind of a movement, first of all, started by a number of people. Arvind Singhal, who's at University of Texas, and some former sort of heads of government and corporations, and a whole bunch of folks got together to really discuss the nature of this, what might be. And the challenge was, what are forms that would put us into 2022? That would, when we're in a meeting or gathering, they'd be the maximally inclusive and maximally engaging. And they came up with, from around the world, from a lot of different sources, what they term 33 liberating structures. And I'll show you these in a second, and we're going to run through the most basic of these and talk about what you get out of this and what, some pitfalls might be, things like that. So that's the most basic form of this. So let me go for a moment to what these are. And for all of you, the place to go for liberating structures is liberatingstructures.com. Let me pull up that website here. You're like, oh, I'm going to run a meeting, or I'm going to run a class, and I want to do things in a little bit of a different way. Everything you might need for this can be found here, okay? When you go to this LS menu here, you can click into any of these 33 structures. And by the way, there's a bunch in development as well, and I'll talk about those soon too. But the most basic one that I'll run you through here in just a moment, 1, 2, 4 all. This is a process by which you can engage everyone simultaneously in generating questions, ideas, and suggestions. It gives you a map for how to do this step by step. What do you do? A little visualization. If you want to put that up on a screen for folks, a section on why you're doing this, and then just tips and traps, little things having been tested to look out for riffs and variations, some examples of this that have been used in different situations. For instance, a group of managers using 2 rounds of this to redesign a less than stimulating weekly meeting in place of a leader telling people what to think and do, often unintentionally. And then there's also sometimes they'll break down by different sectors. If you're using this in healthcare, here's a way it's been used. If you're in education, so everything you need to do these can be found at this site right here. And I'm going to send around some materials to everybody who's here today. 2 of them. One is a quick, it's like a minimized document in just 1 pager of each of these 33 processes that you could potentially use in your meetings and teaching. And then with that is a breakdown of what kind of purpose you might have, how to fit the structure to the purpose, right? So for instance, if you're looking to tap the wisdom of the whole group in rapid cycles, number 13, which is, I think, it's on the next page here. Number 13, which is wise crowds. That's your go-to method, right? So this little menu gives you a way to match purpose with the particular structure or strings of these that you might want to use in a conversation. So, okay, so we're going to move to a breakout room at this point. What I'd like to do, my question for you, and Anna, could you possibly put this into the chat box for everyone? I'm going to give you a minute, first of all, to write down just by yourself, right? Or just think it through if you need to do that, if you don't want to do some writing right now, but at least think through your independent judgment on what thoughts, feelings, and I put thoughts and feelings together because we are always thinking, feeling beings. You can't separate those things if you're a human being. What thoughts, feelings, examples, or other reactions have arisen for you from the questionnaire that you did earlier or anything else that has been discussed so far? Go ahead and just think through what your individual response to that question is first.
I'll just take a moment for transparency and facilitation. So I just copied and pasted what Don had, of course, sent me an email because I knew that was the prompt. And I love, Don, how you put what thoughts, feelings, do you want to be, right, that are coming up as examples, right? And he put in parentheses, as you can see in the chat, the audience will be used to seeing this hyphen, so I'll note that these cannot be separated if you're a human being. And I really love that because I think, Don, what you're bringing here is, it's a lot of information, and the truth is that some of us, I think, spend more time up here thinking, and others spend more time maybe down here feeling, and then we're in a workspace, and so obviously the balance of both. So I just wanted to name that as you're taking time to intake and process everything that Don has just shared with us, I just love that concept of thoughts, feelings. Yeah. So thank you for that, Don, and just thank you for all the information that you've shared. So we're gonna give them how much time in the breakout room?
Okay, now that you've staked out some kind of independent judgment about as a response to the question, I want to put you into pairs, and in pairs for about 3 minutes here, you're just going to discuss what you're thinking, what you've written down from that prompt. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Don.
Here we go.
On the moment.
The next part of this, I'm going to have you in 4s discussing what you just talked about. So this is going to expand the conversation a little bit, but it's particularly because Sonia really wants more conversation. And so I am adapting to that in the moment. All right, let's see. Okay, so give me just a second here. Move everybody there. Okay, room 9.
So as Don is saying that, let me just tell you what, is happening. And he mentioned the 1, 2, 4 is an example. That, just to make it transparent, as he's doing this, first you thought about this by yourself, Okay, it's kind of like think and pair and share, right? Now, then you did it in a group of two, and now you will randomly be assigned to a group of four. 1, 2, 4, and we'll see you back here in 4 minutes. Is that right, Don?
4 minutes. It's going to be fast.
All right.
Okay.
See you all soon. Have
Go.
fun.
So at this part, we would really extend out the process here and have a much fuller discussion amongst the group. But just to truncate some of what we do, I have in room 2, Christine, Julia, Sonia, Tamara. Could one of you just share out no more than 30 seconds some of the things that you talked about, maybe even just one theme that surfaced from that conversation?
Go, Julia.
I'll try. I think one of the major themes was sort of thinking about application of these formats of engagement and communication in teaching versus meetings that we participate as, with peers and colleagues, and like starting to recognize almost like the accepted genres of meeting style in different environments. A lot of us participate in many different kinds of meetings and found it really interesting to think about, to like try to think about all those different contexts together.
Thanks so much. Angie, Natalie, Victoria, Zin, could one of you share out real quickly just anything that emerged?
I can share quickly. So one of them was what some of what Julia just said, but one of the things was how we're answering the meeting. The survey, are we answering as how we experience it? And does that affect our ratings if we're maybe in more marginalized groups and tend to be more self-critical? The connection between that and the rating versus from a more privileged group, how does that affect our rating? Or are we looking at it as leading? And I said, like, I had started with 2 columns, but I couldn't keep up. So I think I answered more for how I experience meetings in general. And then we also talked about this issue of one-on-one meetings.
Great, thanks so much, Angie. Room 5, Hamad, Kanan, Michal, and Teresa. Could one of you speak to this just real quick?
I'll jump in. I think a great point, Kanan, you brought up is like, as faculty, as in the classroom, we have specific tools to break those sort of tendencies, yet we will leave the classroom and go to a meeting and have the zombie-like, he didn't say zombie, I'm saying zombie-like, doing it as always done. So I think for me, okay, zombie got a big reaction, but you know what I mean? So I think that was a huge aha moment for us.
Great, thanks so much. And finally, my mega group, Gina, John, Kevin, Neil, Nirvana, and Ryan. One person, jump in.
We talked about very similar themes. I think a lot of what we were thinking about too sort of was in these 2 distinct spaces where we can, like, we have our classroom versus we attend a meeting, that when you prepare an agenda for each, that the agenda for the meeting never actually notes the modes of engagement, whereas an agenda for a class meeting often does. And what's up with that?
That's our next DEI Friday. What's up with that? We're just going to have that as the title. Love it. So really quickly, some of you in the teaching environment may go, oh, isn't this think, pair, share? The answer to that is yes and no. I can get into the reasons for that separately, but I want to just for everyone underscore what we got here, right? So first of all, there's 2 things that happen when human beings get together in groups. First of all, there's a tendency to underutilize the actual information that exists in the room. And that is bypassed by Robert's Rules of Order, open discussion. Not everybody is included unless everybody gets to stake out some kind of independent judgment about what's on the table, the prompt, the question. So that moment in silence, just going, oh, what do I really think about this, right? Hey, we're going to have I tell this to nonprofits sometimes. They go, we're going to have a gala this year. What should be the name of the gala? I was like, ask everyone in the room to write something down first, right, before going out to open discussion. When we go straight to open discussion, there's also peer influence, peer perceptions, peer pressure, and someone might speak and someone else might speak, and then someone might go, oh, I'm going to suppress my voice and not speak. We lose that information without that moment of, what do you just think individually? Then we go to pairs, right? So for the introverts in the room, that's a way to ramp up a little bit. Like, oh, I don't want to speak to everybody in the group, but speaking one-on-one and sifting these ideas with someone else first, that's a more familiar format. It's more comfortable. We go up from there. It levels the personality playing field as well, right? Someone can't dominate from the beginning of this process. Everybody with this structure is on an even level. This is pairs. This is 4s, right? We have further a chance to sift the ideas a little bit more, and there's shared ownership, right, of what's going on here. So you want to really know what people are thinking. The structure itself kind of puts us through this funnel where that can actually happen. So these can be used in all kinds. This could be used to run an entire meeting. This could be used after a presentation, just to, instead of the dreaded, any questions, you could do, here's 1, 2 for all. Respond to this prompt from this presentation, right? We are right at time. So let me just say, there are 32 more of these. They get more advanced as you go on. The reason I wanted to run this today was because if you get this initial one and the reasoning behind it and what it gets you versus a typical meeting structure, the other ones make a lot more sense. One of the ones we were going to run today, I'm not going to do it, is one where we would generate ideas as a group, but we would have no idea where the ideas came from. They're anonymous, right? And so it's a way to generate ideas quickly and not attach the ideas to particular people and sift things with sort of a process of equality. And at the end of the day, actually sift the ideas that really are manifest within the room. It's called 2510 crowdsourcing. It's one of my favorites. We've run out of time though, so thank you everyone for coming to this DEI Friday. I will certainly be here for the after party. We want to talk some more, or we just want to sing and dance, whatever. It's Friday. Let's do it. Thank you, Anna, for opening this space for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Let's first give a big round of applause to Don. Give him some love in the chats and the Zooms and the emojis and everything. And I just want to say, Don, before I put the recording off, I want to say this here, not just that I'm thanking you for doing this, but I think what is so important, and I see it in Don's work, right? You learn something, he learns something through his research, and then like he embodies it, right? Like his goal, he is the one. I'm just giving you this example. I remember, Don, you and I sitting together in a faculty meeting years ago, and we had the same thought that something was going to be discussed, and then immediately it went to open discussion, right? Like open discussion. So what do we all think? And then the as you said, usual suspects, raise their hands and start talking. And there was no time. If you're listening, you cannot be listening and thinking and speaking at the same time, right? And we know that from our students. And as Kanan said, he had to leave. But what he said before is like, we are a certain way with our students because we understand good pedagogy. And we understand, many of us, right, focus on understanding how to incorporate different voices and all this stuff in the space of learning for our students. And then we show up in other spaces and it's like we don't think of any of that, and we just show up, as Teresa said, as zombies sometimes, and not the brainless part, but just basically going through the motions, whatever that is. I don't know what word that kind of character would be, but the idea is to actually be mindful, right? And that's part of why we're here, is to bring mindfulness and thoughtfulness and depth to discussions around DEI, right? And so I want to say thank you. This has really been, you were an example for me of a colleague who is pushing us in different venues to try to have more inclusive conversations. And I love this idea of the last one you gave us, which is, what was it called about the 25, the one that's to get up anonymous thoughts? What is that one called?
2510 crowdsourcing.
Thank you. Right. The crowdsourcing one. And I think, and we all know this, academia is very hierarchical. We know that in the space right now. We know that just being here. We know who faculty is, who staff is, and what are the different levels and whatever, and students. And that is, we are ingrained into that. That is part of the, the air we breathe in academia. And it's a very, it mimics our society and the hierarchy. And to be able to come up with structures, as Don gave an example of this crowdsourcing, where the ideas are not linked to the name, the status, the level of professor, the degrees, right? That's huge. That is huge. That would be, I think, very liberating for some of our spaces. So I will, first of all, thank you again, Don. I will thank all of you who are in this room. I will thank one person in particular before I get off the Zoom, because she reminded me of Mindful Mondays. Teresa, yes, it's you. And I'm keeping the recording on right now because I want to do a plug for a wonderful, wonderful space that Joy Allison, Teresa Liu, and Tanuja Ramchal, who is no longer full-time at Baruch, but they have created this space as part of the CUNY DEI incubator that I'm also part of, every Monday for our students. But it's not just for students. We have kind of opened it up to faculty and staff to show up every Monday. It's virtual, it's on Zoom. Teresa's putting the information in the chat. This coming Monday, actually, I'll be running it. And it's just a place to tap in to, you know, the joy and love that we have within ourselves, and all the other feelings in between. And so please show up if you can to Mindful Mondays. You get the information here. All the information that Dawn shared will be on our website. We've dropped that in the chat already. All of our resources on DEI Fridays, all the recordings are right there, and not just for you, but for people in your community. So please, please, please share with them. I'm going to stop the recording right now. I just thank you all so much for being here. You are very appreciated. You make the space really special. And you certainly fill my cup, and I think, and I just am really appreciative. Thank you.